The research that built everything we know about autophagy was done in yeast cells, not in a female body running on the hormonal profile of a woman in her 40s. Yoshinori Osumi earned the Nobel Prize in 2016 for mapping this cellular cleanup process. What that foundational work could not tell us is how estrogen changes the threshold, and estrogen changes it significantly. The window most women are using to reach autophagy is built around a body that is not theirs. Today, you are going to understand exactly how long the window actually needs to be after 40, and why the standard protocol keeps you just short of where the real work begins. Most women think they are triggering autophagy. They are reaching the preparation phase, not the cleanup itself. Autophagy is your body's cellular recycling system. It breaks down damaged proteins, clears out dysfunctional cell debris, and converts what it finds into raw material the body can use. For it to activate, a specific regulatory protein called mTOR has to go quiet. Think of mTOR as the switch that keeps the body in building mode. When it is on, the body is growing, holding resources in place, running business as usual. When it finally goes silent, the body shifts into deep maintenance, the real cellular cleanup. Estrogen was helping flip that switch. It modulated mTOR activity directly, making the transition from building mode to cleanup mode faster and easier during a fast. After 40, estrogen drops. mTOR stays active longer into the fasting window. The cells hold their ground. The body needs a longer, deeper period of nutrient deprivation before the cleanup signal fires. This is not a malfunction. It is a change in the molecular scaffolding that was always doing part of the work for you. What this means in practical terms, the 16-hour window was never calibrated for a body where that scaffolding has thinned. There is something happening inside a fasting window every morning that most women never account for, and it is working directly against autophagy at the worst possible hour. Cortisol spikes naturally in the early morning. That is by design. It is the signal that gets you moving. But in a body with adequate estrogen, that spike is buffered. Estrogen moderates how high it climbs and how quickly it tapers. After 40, the buffer thins. The cortisol spike goes higher. It stays elevated longer. And here is the piece that changes everything. Cortisol directly activates mTOR, not as a side effect, as a primary action. When cortisol tells the body to mobilize and protect its stores, one of the molecular tools it uses is mTOR reactivation, which means for a woman over 40, the hormonal surge of early morning is actively reinstating the block on autophagy. Right at the hour the protocol claims she should already be inside it. A woman fasting from 8 at night typically hits her cortisol peak somewhere around hours 12 to 14 of her fast. The exact window the 16-hour protocol marks as the autophagy zone is the window her cortisol is spiking through, resetting the clock. She is not failing. The timeline was built for a body where that cortisol spike was already being damped by estrogen. This is exactly the intersection the natural Mounjaro protocol was designed around. The place where standard fasting advice and the female hormonal environment after 40 directly collide. The 21-day schedule is built around this cortisol window specifically. How to position the fast so the peak falls in the early phase rather than the activation phase, and the autophagy permissive window falls before the first meal arrives. That link is on screen if you want the practical version of everything covered here. But cortisol positioning is only the structural fix. Underneath it is a second mechanism that determines how deep the autophagy signal goes once the window is finally right. The hour you break your fast decides what happened in the 2 hours before it. The late fasting window, the window that opens after cortisol begins its natural decline, typically past hour 17 in most women over 40, is where actual autophagy activation becomes physiologically possible. When cortisol drops, mTOR activity softens with it. The cellular environment, for the first time in the fast, becomes permissive for the cleanup signal. Autophagy-related markers, including the accumulation of LC32, a protein that directly indicates autophagy is underway, do not reach meaningful levels in women in this hormonal state until that later phase. A woman who breaks at hour 16 steps out of the fast just as the signal is opening. Not 2 hours short in a trivial sense, 2 hours short in the only sense that matters. The work had not yet begun. Shifting the window by 2 hours, not eating less, just starting and ending later, repositions the fast so the cortisol peak falls in hours 6 through 8, and the permissive window falls in hours 15 through 18 before the first meal. The calories do not change. The cellular outcome changes entirely. But there is still a layer underneath this, one that determines what happens to the autophagy signal in the final 30 minutes before the fast ends. And most women are collapsing it. What you eat in the first 30 minutes after a fast ends can undo the last 3 hours of it. Autophagy does not switch off the instant the fast breaks. It tapers based on what the first hormonal signal is. Break the fast with high leucine protein, whey protein, large amounts of eggs, most commercial protein shakes, and you spike insulin and activate mTOR directly within minutes. If the cellular cleanup ran its full course before that meal, the transition is fine. Clean machinery, rebuild phase begins. But if the first meal arrives before the autophagy window ever properly opened, the mTOR spike collapses a signal that had not yet delivered anything. Glucose triggers the same shutdown, faster. Fat taken alone barely registers. It does not produce the same insulin response and does not reactivate mTOR through the same pathway. This is why compounds found in black coffee and green tea have been studied as potential autophagy extenders. They do not send the hormonal signal that ends the process. For women over 40, breaking the fast with a fat-based addition rather than an immediate protein-heavy meal can preserve the late-window autophagy state for an additional hour or two, not because fat is magic, because it does not send the stop signal. This means the question is never just how long. It is how long, starting when, and what the first 30 minutes of eating look like. There is one more variable that changes the entire equation, and it only applies to women who are still cycling, even irregularly. During the luteal phase, the 2 weeks after ovulation, progesterone rises, and progesterone changes the cellular stress threshold in a specific way. The body becomes more sensitive to perceived energy shortage during this phase. Cortisol rises more sharply in response to fasting. Hunger signals amplify, and autophagy, rather than activating cleanly as a repair mechanism, can push toward a stress preservation response instead. Women who fast identically across the month and find the second half consistently harder, more draining, more hunger, less effect, are not imagining the difference. The biology of the window changes depending on the hormonal phase it runs inside. A fixed, unchanging protocol applied across the full cycle is not one protocol. It is one protocol applied to 2 different hormonal environments expecting the same outcome from both. Perimenopausal women especially, cycling but irregularly, estrogen dropping but not gone, are often running luteal phase biology most of the time without knowing it. The window needs to flex. The reason autophagy hits differently for women after 40 is not variation in willpower or effort. Estrogen was doing molecular work inside the fasting window, moderating mTOR, buffering cortisol, pulling the cleanup threshold closer. The protocols most women follow were built around a body where that work was already happening. When estrogen drops, the threshold does not drop with it. The requirement stays where it is. The support structure just has to be rebuilt consciously, through window timing, cortisol positioning, luteal phase awareness, and how the fast ends. The 16-hour window is not wrong. It is just not the full answer for the body you are actually in now. Everything in this video is free, because understanding what your body is actually doing should cost you nothing. The natural Mounjaro protocol exists because knowing the mechanism and building a daily schedule that functions inside your real life are two completely different problems. I spent real time working out the practical version of this, the window positioning for each phase, how to break the fast in a way that lets the autophagy signal complete, how to activate the GLP-1 pathway naturally so hunger and cravings are not fighting you from the inside, and how to build a 21-day structure that resets the whole system rather than just adjusting one variable at a time. That is what the protocol is. It costs something because building a system specific enough to work in the female body after 40 takes real work, and because the women who invest in it actually follow it. Women using this protocol are watching belly fat shift that has not moved in years, not because they fasted longer, because for the first time, the window matched the body it was built for. The link is on